see. Live on Periscope, live on Twitch. Let's see if we're live on YouTube. Believe we're live on YouTube. All right. Hope everybody's having an okay day. Jordan Sheridan, Status Coup. Sorry I'm late. I was pre-recording a couple interviews, so it took me a little bit. But we have two really awesome interviews today with Professor Richard Wolff, economist, who we definitely need to hear from him as we are looming further and further into a, frankly, economic depression. Which I think he speaks about so eloquently. Also have an interview with Seattle City Council member Shama Sawant, a proud socialist who is now facing a recall campaign that is backed by right-wing forces, Democratic forces, as well as, frankly, possibly even Amazon. So we will speak with her. Definitely, really important, the interview I did with her, because it is really showing how once progressive / socialism is pushed, once it is successful in certain places, you are going to see more and more efforts like this in terms of recall efforts. So really important to show you this interview. Let me just make sure everybody knows we're live. Sending out a text message here. Yeah, hold on. All right. 222. Hold on. Sending out the text now. Submit. Press that like button. The more people that press like, the more people that will see this very live stream. We also have to, of course, update you on Jen's status, which unfortunately is not great. So we'll update you on that. Let me just send the text message so people know we are live. 898. Shama Sawant. Okay. I believe it went out. Hopefully. The text message went out. So, welcome, Status Coup in the house. I want to first update you to make sure you guys know what's going on with Jen. Of course, Jen covered the super spreader event the other day. I think it was on Thursday, in terms of Rudy Giuliani, his unhinged conspiracy press conference in D.C. that was held at the Republican National Headquarters. It was held in a very
small room. Rudy and several other of his co-conspirators were not wearing masks. His son, Andrew Giuliani, was also there. And the next day, Andrew Giuliani announced that he was COVID positive. So obviously, they weren't wearing masks, and you had one that was COVID positive. So Jen, unfortunately, has not been able to go somewhere to get tested. But she did take a home test yesterday that she sent in, and tomorrow she is going to get tested. With that said, frankly, it's very likely that she, unfortunately, does have coronavirus. I'll show you a picture that she sent me. This is Jen lying in bed. She has currently 101.6. 101.6 fever. Obviously, that's no joke. She has very bad fatigue. She told me just walking to the bathroom is like climbing a mountain. Let me know if the volume is better now. I just increased it. She is experiencing some shortness of breath. So although she doesn't have the actual test back, all the symptoms are very connected to COVID. So, without having the test back, we can't say 100%, but it seems to me she does have COVID because these are all the symptoms. Let me read word for word. Shortness of breath, body aches, stuffy nose, no appetite, fever, extreme fatigue, some coughing, but definitely not frequent. So she does have significant coronavirus symptoms. Likely a test will confirm she has coronavirus. Not gonna lie to you, it's very scary for her. Very scary, I'm sure, for her children. Scary for me as her friend and business partner. So all we could do is monitor it. She is going to get an official test tomorrow. But other than that, she's quarantining. She's been in her bedroom away from her kids for the last few days. And we're just going to have to monitor it. Hopefully the breathing does not get any worse than it is now. Hopefully the fever, 101.6 is pretty high. So we have to all we could do at this point is hope. She is relatively young at 35. Not trying to blow up her spot, but, she said how old she is in the past. Relatively healthy, but we know that COVID has unfortunately taken a lot of healthy people. So prayers right now, if you're religious, even if you're not, say a prayer. I know that Jen will really appreciate all your good wishes. You could send us your good wishes, info@statuscoup.com, info@statuscoup.com. Definitely send your well wishes there. I know she would be really, really feel good reading them. And I will update you as we get more updates. So for now, fever, no, not a 106 fever, 101.6, 101.6, not 106 fever. But 101.6 is a high fever. Make no mistake. 101.6 is high. And, she'll have to monitor that fever as well as the breath. And if it gets any higher and if the breathing gets any worse, definitely having, she'll have to consider possibly being hospitalized. But hopefully we don't have to go to that dark place now. But definitely send in your thoughts at info@statuscoup.com. And, I'm just giving you the information. Jen told me it would, of course, make her feel better. Donations to Status Coup in the Super Chat or in GoFundMe, excuse me. So drop it in the Super Chat or GoFundMe. We're close to another milestone. And also, we are getting even closer to 100,000 subscribers. So if you're not subscribed yet, definitely hit that subscribe button. We are less than 300 subscribers to go. Less than 300 subscribers to go to hit 100,000. So hopefully we can get there. And definitely, if you have not yet, please smash that like button. It's a thumbs up button right under the live stream. The more people that press the like button, the more people that will see this live stream. So we got two powerhouses today. Interviews, Professor Richard Wolff, as well as Shama Sawant, the socialist city council member in Seattle, who has been a thorn in big business and Amazon's side for a very, very long time. So I'm going to start. I recorded both of these interviews. I'm going to start speaking with Shama Sawant. If you're unfamiliar, Shama Sawant is a proud socialist, doesn't belong to the Democratic Party. She was instrumental in Seattle passing a $15 minimum wage. She was also instrumental in the Amazon tax, which is she has had to fight tooth and nail to get a modest tax on Amazon for every one of its employees. I think it's like $200 to $250 a head to go towards affordable housing, because there isn't a housing crisis in Seattle because of companies like Amazon and Jeff Bezos. She also helped spearhead the ban on tear gas during the Black Lives Matter movement, even though Seattle police kind of blew it off. Technically, it passed through the city council. And for all her efforts, Amazon spent over $1 million. Over $1 million Amazon spent to try and defeat her in her last race for city council last year, and she still won. Now, after they couldn't defeat her at the ballot box, there is a shadowy cabal of right-wing Democrat forces and big business trying to recall her from office. Thank you, Thomas, $1.99 in the Super Chat. Trying to recall her from office, citing, absurd ethics violations. this is a direct threat not just to Shama Sawant, but all progressives. If they get away with recalling Shama Sawant from office, then it's a slippery slope from there, and they will go after any strong progressive or proud socialist and try and throw bogus ethics violations to get them out of office. Definitely keep pressing that like button. And here's my interview with Shama Sawant. Hey, it's Jordan. Delighted to be joined by Seattle City Council member Shama Sawant, a proud socialist who, other than Bernie Sanders, I really can't think of anyone who has drawn the ire of what I call the United Corporations of America. So after an impressive victory to be reelected last year, now it seems to me right-wing efforts have taken the forefront to recall you, citing ethical breaches and all these dastardly things, such as protesting with activists against the oppressive Seattle mayor and other things. So can you inform people how did this recall start and who do you believe is behind it?
Absolutely. First of all, just the charges that you mentioned, Jordan, there are 4 charges. And I say charges as in these are not based in fact, but these are claims that have been made by the petitioners for the recall campaign. And the charges are precisely what you said, which is basically accusing my office for doing exactly what I promised to do every time I ran for election and what I have fulfilled in my promises, which is stand up unabashedly and unapologetically for working people and marginalized communities and our oppressed people, including the vast numbers of workers who right now are being financially and health-wise devastated from the COVID pandemic and also from the economic recession. And so when you look at the substance of these charges, what lies behind the surface is what matters, which is that big business, the right wing, and the Democratic Party establishment, the political establishment, they are absolutely infuriated by the impact that my office and the movements that we have helped build has had. But this is especially happening in the context of, one, of course, this pandemic, but this pandemic has also helped, just in a very sharp way, unravel what was already in process, which is a deep and long-term crisis in the global system of capitalism. The system is completely defunct. It has no solution for the climate catastrophe, for poverty and inequality, and especially for the tens of millions of young people in our country and and many more around the world. There is there's nothing on offer other than a dead-end economy. So it's in this context that the Black Lives Matter protests became the biggest ever street protest in U.S. history, bringing out over 26 million multiracial united movement in the United States. And so it's no coincidence that 3 of the 4 charges that big business and the right wing and the establishment have leveled at me in this so-called recall are related to the Black Lives Matter movement, and they are very much stemming from my 100% support of the Black Lives Matter movement. So in reality, this is not an attack on just me. This is an attack on socialists everywhere. This is an attack on the left throughout America. It is an attack on the tens of millions of young people who courageously went out on the streets against police violence, who are fed up with racism and oppression and with inequality and are looking for something better. And I think that is why it's important that we are talking about this, because everybody who has a stake in building a different kind of society should take this seriously and help us to defeat it.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but one of the charges, I just couldn't believe this, that you, I don't know, let protesters in Seattle City Hall or something like that at night, as if like it's a castle that needs to have a moat around it and the people that pay their salaries cannot go inside or peacefully protest. I don't even know what would be the objection to that, what laws or principles are violated, or is the principle that working people in Seattle can't protest at City Hall?
I think, Jordan, you hit the nail on the head by describing it as if, is it a castle with a moat around it? This is City Hall. By definition, this should belong to the people. The representatives who have been elected by voters need to be accountable to the vast majority of the constituents who have put them in office. So, from any standpoint of democracy, any concept that any reasonable person might have about democracy, this should be a non-issue. And let me just clarify before there are any questions about this. We have not broken any laws whatsoever. The point is, this is not about the law, and this is not about democracy. What I'm trying to say is that when the ruling class under capitalism, when the political establishment comes under threat from a rising movement that is increasingly refusing to accept the authority of these bourgeois parties, that is increasingly finding these political establishment leaders to be not legitimate because they have not offered anything different, anything better for ordinary people. In the context of rising movements, then you will see the political establishment throwing all their stated commitments to laws and democracy out the window. In other words, City Hall is supposed to be for the people. Well, they will make a scandal out of the fact that the socialist elected representative invited ordinary people, as you said, taxpayers, people of our city, to City Hall. And I'll just tell you one thing, in relation to what you just said. When we went there, we were just there for an hour. We did a general assembly. It was really empowering. Hundreds of people came and told me and my staff this was empowering for them to come to City Hall. But I just wanted to recount one small incident because it was so moving for me and it captured the essence of everything you just said, which is a young Black activist leader, a woman who's also a member of the labor movement, who's been a courageous leader on the front lines of the protests in Seattle, who came, she walked along with me inside City Hall. And the moment she walked in and she saw 1,000 people there chanting for Black Lives Matter, she broke into tears and she said, I have never been to City Hall. I never felt like I could come here. And I have never thought that I could have an elected representative who would make us feel like we belong, like we could have a power, and that our power comes from being organized in these large numbers. So I think that is precisely what threatens and scares big business and the political establishment, and they should be scared, because if we get organized, if we fight back, there is nothing to stop us. And this is not idle speculation. Just recently in the summer, we saw how, as a product of the Black Lives Matter movement in Seattle, we were able to lead and win the historic Amazon tax, which has now meant a $2 billion transfer over 10 years from big business to working people to fund affordable housing and the Green New Deal. It is all this social progress that big business wants a do-over on.
And let's talk about big business. I'm reading an article, this is from September, so I'm sure it's similar now, but they claim, the Recall Sawant campaign claims that they got donations from 1,700 people. Well, 94% of those donors were anonymous. So who the hell knows who's donating to this? They also asked for donations no more than $25 because I guess there's some provision that if it's $25 or less, you don't have to disclose who you are. So it could be Amazon, it could be Boeing, it could be Democratic establishment, could be a whole lot of people that kind of makes it look populist when we really don't know what it is.
I think that's very true. In fact, it's a very conscious approach that they're using where, as you said, they're keeping many of their donations 25 or lower because that allows them legally to have anonymous donations. And look, let's be clear. There is unfortunately a growing right-wing tendency in most cities around the nation. And a lot of that has to do with how emboldened right-wing ideology has become since the Trump election in 2016. And in fact, even though Trump has been defeated, we know Trumpism and right-wing ideas are not going to be dead automatically. It's, because they themselves in the first place have been a product of the fact that neither of the two political parties represents ordinary people. And that is why actually it's very urgent to build the left. So I think it's true that there are people who are not, your traditional big business or even millionaires who subscribe to right-wing ideas and are probably going to be opposed to my office and are probably going to support the recall campaign. But we should not kid ourselves that just because there are these anonymous donations, this is not being driven by big business. We should have full confidence in our basic analysis, first of all, about how this world works under capitalism, and also look at the facts. We know Martin Seelig, who is a really noxious Trump-supporting billionaire. He actually, one of his distinguishing characteristics is that he's a corporate landlord in Seattle, among the many other corporate interests he has. And one of the buildings he owns in Seattle is the building in which ICE is located on Seattle downtown. And in fact, I personally have been out there doing civil disobedience against Trump's odious policies against the immigrant community. And so Martin Seelig is a prominent Trump-supporting billionaire who has donated to this campaign. In fact, his daughter, Jordan Seelig, has been quoted in a local newspaper as offering all her help to the recall campaign. And we recently heard one of the new donors to this campaign is the CFO of Airbnb, which is another notorious corporation. So we should expect that if this recall is actually approved by the state Supreme Court, which I wouldn't be surprised if they are, because overwhelmingly the courts are not on the side of the left, let alone socialists. But when this actually goes into ballot, if the state Supreme Court approves the recall, we will absolutely see not only a flood of major donations officially to the campaign from big business and the billionaire and millionaire class, but we will see independent expenditures. We will see we will see a part two of what we saw last year. Last year, as you mentioned, we fought our second re-election and third election campaign to city council. And despite all the massive opposition from big business led by Amazon and the Chamber of Commerce, despite even all the progressive Democrats on the city council, Latinas who call themselves labor representatives running candidates against my office, despite all of that effort, despite $1 million being spent against us, we were able to win. But we're going to see part two of all that corporate cash. And that is why I would urge everybody to join our struggle, because it is important we send a message to big business that when you attack our interests, when you attack working people, we will get organized and fight back.
And I think what's important here is there's a psychology involved. On one end, big business is scared. You successfully got the Amazon tax after successfully raising minimum wage to $15 in Seattle years ago. Also, at least temporarily, a prohibition on tear gas. I don't know if they're actually following that. So they're seeing this slippery slope of progressive accomplishments, and they're getting deathly afraid of opening up a Pandora's box that they can't close again. And then on the other end, I think, listen, Amazon poured in over $1 million to try and defeat you last time. That's a lot for a city council race. Do you think there's an element here where now with the recall, they're just trying to tire out progressives and socialists to the point where, I mean, if you have to continually fighting Amazon just to reelect you, fighting tooth and nail for these victories, and now fighting to keep you in office, it seems to me their strategy is to just exhaust people.
Absolutely. I think that is very much part of the strategy. On the one hand, they have a combination of arrogance and hubris of the system that they dominate. But on the other hand, they're also fearful, not of me as an individual, but of what my office has been able to accomplish, because we have shown a fundamentally different approach. I mean, let me just say, a lot of even the so-called progressive Democrats opposed us last year. Their approach throughout, since my election, has been to corrupt or intimidate my office through psychological warfare, saying I was not nice, I did not work well with others. They're throwing all this so-called respectability politics at me. None of that worked. We were able to win $15 an hour. First year I was elected, in fact, 6 months after I took office, we have won landmark renter. This year, we won a law that has not been passed anywhere outside of France, to my knowledge, which is a winter evictions ban in our city to protect renters in especially the harshest months of the year. And as you said, we just won a ban on police use of or chemical weapons. I mean, and then we won the Amazon tax, of course, quickly after that. They want to overturn these victories, no doubt. But above and beyond all of that, they absolutely fear the example that we are setting, because once you have an example of working class people getting organized in an independent movement, not depending on the establishment, not having faith in the establishment, and on our own strength, winning a serious victory. No victory by alone, no reform is going to end capitalism and bring about a socialist society. But what this fight for every reform does is it raises the confidence of working people that if we can win this, we can more. That's the slippery slope, as you said, that big business is afraid of. And part of their is to tire people and movements down by offensive upon offensive against us. And so I think we have to learn a lesson from this as well. And I would say the message it sends to us when we see such repeated attacks from big business, first of all, the message it has to send to us is to understand it does not look any different. As Frederick Douglass said so many years ago during the fight for slavery, a fight to end slavery concedes nothing without a demand. It never has and it never will. So a big lesson we have to learn here is that the fight for progressive change of any kind, whether we're talking about women's rights, LGBTQ rights, the end to Black oppression, or the end to poverty, or dealing with the climate crisis, it doesn't matter what is politicizing and radicalizing you. One thing we have to understand is that there is no progressive change without a fight against the ruling class and the capitalist class, which has a stake in preserving the status quo. And we don't want the status quo. We want change. And so that represents a political struggle that we have to undertake. So just understanding that it doesn't look any different, I think it elevates our understanding and immediately infuses confidence in the movement, because that means we've got to gear up and fight. And there's nothing with that. We do that proudly. But there's more to it than that. When we are defending against like this recall campaign against my office, we also have to understand that we are not going to play defense. The best defense is an offense. So that's why the solidarity campaign that we have launched, we're calling it the Shama Solidarity campaign against the recall attempt. We are not just saying, oh, please save our seat. What we're saying is, look, this is what we have accomplished using this seat to build movements. If you think this is worth preserving, then we've got to fight for it. But you know what? We're not just fighting to preserve what we have won. We're fighting to win more victories. And that is why our campaign against the recall is also tied to a very inspiring offensive program of demands, including guaranteed jobs program under COVID, for a Green New Deal jobs program, by further taxing big business, for COVID relief for working people who have been affected by this pandemic, for canceling rent, mortgage, and utility payments for people who are unable to pay, and the real need for civilian oversight on the police, elected civilian oversight with full powers on the police.
And lastly, I mean, I don't think anyone watching would be naive enough to think Amazon isn't pulling some strings behind the scenes. We just saw this horrific report about their using the infamous Pinkerton spying agency on its workers in Europe, surveilling workers, surveilling environmentalists, surveilling, unionized movements in Europe. I think they're doing similar things here. What is your thoughts on Amazon after, again, they lost, and now there's a modest tax on them in Seattle, their role in trying to recall you?
I have no doubt that Amazon is going to be a big player. I mean, obviously, we don't make the mistake of thinking that Amazon is something unique, and it's much worse than the run-of-the-mill workings of capitalism. Obviously, we know that's not true, but we also know that this is a product of capitalism itself, such a behemoth with $1 trillion global economic footprint. Obviously, that kind of disproportionate wealth comes with disproportionate political influence as well. So just like Amazon was a leader in its attempt to defeat us last year, which they did not succeed in, we have no doubt they're going to play an outsized role in the recall campaign as well. And, this is happening in the context of Amazon many corporations have profited during the pandemic in Seattle, and this is obviously going to be true for corporations in other cities as well. But look at especially Amazon's numbers. Amazon has made 11.5 billion with a B, $11.5 billion of profits just since April. I mean, April is when the pandemic, and the first lockdown and everything began. So since April, in that period when tens of millions of working people have taken a huge hit, enormous suffering economically because of the layoffs, because of income loss, not to mention the 250,000 deaths that have happened because of the criminal the criminal negligence by the Trump administration to deal with COVID. In that same period, these billionaires are amassing cash. So in other words, it is not hyperbole to call them pandemic profiteers. They are the pandemic profiteers. So Amazon's role and the role of these corporations in the recall effort against us is in the context of them making disproportionate profits in the face of the suffering of ordinary people. And that's why I think, in addition to the demands that our campaign will be fighting for starting January, we've already launched it here in Seattle. We also need to tie our fight against the recall in Seattle to the struggles of workers at Amazon themselves. I mean, we've seen some courageous speaking out by Amazon warehouse workers, delivery drivers throughout the nation, all the way from Seattle here to New York and Staten Island, where some of the workers have actually been fired for their actions to demand that there should be a safe workplace in the context of the pandemic. And just today, the Amazon workers in Alabama have filed for their union election at their warehouse in Bessemer, Alabama. This is extremely important, and we should make sure that workers who are fighting back so courageously against this massive corporation and the wealthiest people in the world, we need to be on their side. We need to be at the picket lines with them if they take actions, and we need to show to ordinary people that the fight against the recall in Seattle is tied to the fight of all the Amazon workers throughout the nation. And indeed, this is an international fight against capitalism.
And how could people support you in these efforts to avoid, if the Supreme Court of Washington State lets this continue, how could people support you?
I think it's very important that people actively support us. And in fact, the Supreme Court decision will come in January. I would say, please don't wait for that. If you are inspired by what we have just discussed here, please get in touch with us. Please go to kshamasolidarity.org. It's my first name, and solidarity.org. You will get all the information there. Most immediately, we need donations from you all, because the recall campaign has already amassed $180,000 in donations from, as you just mentioned, right-wing and corporate donors. And in order to fight back against what we know is going to be a new onslaught of corporate spending, we have an urgent goal of raising another $20,000 by the end of this month. So if you were going to spend on Thanksgiving and Christmas, but you're not going to because this is a pandemic, this is such a worthy cause, because we are not about any individual or personality or any individual's career. Our office has been used 100% to fight for ordinary people, and we need to keep this office so that we can continue fighting and inspire further struggles.
Thank you, Councilmember Kshama Sawant. We will definitely stay in touch on this.
Thank you.
Hope you enjoyed that last video. Hop on over to Status. That was Shama Sawant, Seattle City Council member, proud socialist, who, frankly, corporations are trying to basically enact a coup d'etat of democracy. She won her last election. She beat Amazon, who poured in over $1 million. Over $1 million they poured in for a local city council race. That's crazy. And now they're trying to recall her for the crime of letting peaceful protesters in Seattle City Hall at night and marching with protesters to protest outside the mayor's office, the neoliberal, democratic, corporate, beloved mayor of Seattle. What is this? This is the bourgeoisie. What do you want to make the Seattle City Hall a castle with a moat surrounding it that people can't protest? This is an ethical violation? Because I can name a lot more ethical violations in the United Corporations of America than anything Shama Sawant, who is a champion of working people, who is not single-handedly responsible, but had a huge, huge impact and is a huge reason that $15 minimum wage passed in Seattle. That Amazon, there is now a Amazon tax in Seattle, a modest tax. It should be more. So we will continue covering this and interviewing her. And please, I'm going to post this tomorrow, the interview itself. Share it. More people need to know about this because CNN's certainly not going to cover it. MSNBC's certainly not going to cover it. And dare I say, other independent outlets are not covering it. So before I air my interview with Professor Richard Wolff, please smash that like button. 460 people are watching, but only 360 of you have pressed that like button. I need over 100 of you. Please smash that like button. Really, really appreciate it. Thank you. Terrence just left $20 in the GoFundMe, so we're now just $400 away from another milestone, $132,000 raised. As I always remind you, we don't have that much in the bank. That's how much we've cumulatively raised over the last 2.5 years, but we've spent in real time to report in the field, buy new equipment, et cetera, et cetera. So please, if you got money, if you don't, we understand. But if you got a couple bucks, drop it in the GoFundMe. Please subscribe to this channel. As I told you, we are now just, I think, less than 300 subscribers. Less than 300 subscribers away from hitting 100,000 subscribers right there. So please, if you haven't subscribed, subscribe. Spread the coup. Tell your friends, tell your family, your animals, I don't care who. Press that subscribe button. I want to hit 100,000 this week if we can. And of course, please keep sending your well wishes. info@statuscoup.com. info@statuscoup.com. As I shared at the beginning of the show, Jen, unfortunately, has 101.6 fever, not 106, 101.6. Is starting to cough, does have a little bit of shortness of breath. Hasn't gotten her COVID test back yet. She did a home test yesterday. She's going to get a test tomorrow at an office. It's just been hard to get a test because so many places all around the country are running out of tests. But she definitely has all the symptoms of COVID, so we'll just assume she has it until she gets the test back. She told me her breathing isn't so bad that she thinks she has to go to the hospital. It's just a little uncomfortable. But 101.6 is no joke. It's definitely a high fever. So I will update you as much as I can, but I know she appreciates well wishes. info@statuscoup.com. And, of course, Super Chats, GoFundMe, much, much appreciated. Thank you. The Pink Dido, 1,500 ISK. Not familiar with that currency, but I appreciate it. Thomas, $1.99. Appreciate it, Thomas. What else? Did I miss any others? Okay. Keep it coming. My apologies in advance. My interview with Richard Wolff, not the best camera angle. You see his chin quite a bit, or his chin gets cut off, but the authority of his words you could hear crystal clear. But he's not really in frame. I'll fix that for next time. So here's the interview with Professor Richard Wolff. Excuse me for 1 second. Screen's going to go black as I punch it in. It wasn't ready by the time we went live. Here is my interview with Professor Richard Wolff. Hey, it's Jordan. Delighted to be joined by Professor Richard Wolff, founder of Democracy at Work, an amazing economist. Thought you were the perfect person to speak with because while a lot of folks in the media and kind of the, I guess you could call it, Beltway establishment are doing jumping jacks for, a return to normalcy, millions and millions of people are just economically devastated. And it looks like we're heading into a dark winter, both health-wise as well as economically. I wanted to first ask you, my reading of the latest economic numbers are we have a real growing long-term unemployment crisis. What are you seeing that hasn't been widely reported?
Well, it's not so much that it hasn't been reported as that the bits and pieces that get reported are either without context or without the linkages among them that make the whole of all those pieces much bigger than the sum of their parts, that kind of a thing.
Could you lift your head a little bit?
Sure,
There you
sorry.
go. There you go.
So let me get at what I mean. Millions of people are scheduled to lose unemployment compensation the day after Christmas. Millions more people have been accruing unpaid rents for the apartments they live in, unpaid mortgage payments for the homes that they occupy. Tens of thousands of commercial enterprises have not paid commercial rents for months. This is a tsunami of unpayable debts. Those are on top of the accumulated student debt that students tell me every day there's no way that they can pay. You can't keep building on a foundation that's wobbly like that. I mean, I'm no spokesperson for landlords, Lord knows, but if all those stores are not paying rent, what are the landlords going to do? And the answer, as any banker will tell you as he sips his martini, the landlords are up to their eyebrows in debt. They owe money to banks from whom they borrowed to build the mall that houses the store that isn't paying its rent. And therefore, the bank loans are getting less and less covered by landlords who say they can't pay them because their tenants are not. You see, I mean, everything is touched by this. You've got to see that if you add to this fragility a tsunami of evictions or loss of a few $100s a week, which is what millions will lose, you're completely out of control here. What you've got is a new administration coming in, not wanting to face how serious this is, and that's because they haven't faced how serious the economic consequences of their actions are for a very long time. When Mr. Biden says we're going back to normal, my ears start to burn because you didn't understand, and I'm talking here to the Democrats. The Republicans are a lost cause in this kind of business because they're just, doing the work for the corporations and letting the chips fall where they may. But the Democrats have a base in the working class, and the Democrats seem to have missed the point that 30 years of neoliberalism, of globalization, of jobs going abroad, of new technology, computers, robots, artificial intelligence, you put all that together and you are jeopardizing the jobs of millions of people. If you look over the last 30 years, the American working class has been the pioneer, taking on more debt than any working class in the history of the world. And this is on top of wages that stagnated. I mean, of course they're freaked out. Of course they're upset. Of course, as they send more and more people out to work, old people greeting you at Walmarts, teenagers spending their weekends, the adult women, particularly the white ones, going out to work, and the families falling apart, the emotional glue that held it together is dissolving. I mean, you have a tsunami and then you fail to prepare for a pandemic. You fail to prepare for a perfectly predictable capitalist crash. They happen every 4 to 7 years. We had one in 2000, one in 2008, one in now 2020. That's 3 in 20 years. That's within the 4 to 7 year average rate. You weren't ready for anything, and you want to go back to normal. It's normal that gave us Mr. Trump. You're going back, and you're going to do it. Only next time, the Trump, or whoever replaces him, may be less crude, less clumsy, less ineffectual, And this Trump, despite all that, did real well. Imagine a smoother version.
And what I find so maddening is really all I've heard from Biden is we should pass the HEROES Act. And there are some good things in there, but for the level of crisis we're in, all the things you just talked about, to me, the HEROES Act is kind of a Band-Aid for a gunshot wound. It is totally insufficient. And that's the most he's talking about, when in reality, it looks like we'll probably have Republicans keeping the Senate. So they're just going to do what they did in 2009-10, obstruct and then blame the tanking economy on the sitting president and the sitting party. So it seems to me like the rescue choppers are not coming if we're to look at Janet Yellen as Treasury Secretary and the rest of the people that Biden is appointing.
Well, let me speak for a moment, if I may. Janet Yellen and I were classmates.
Okay.
We went to Yale at the same time, roughly a couple years apart. We had the same professors at Yale. We got the same degree, PhD, from Yale in economics. I know exactly how she was trained because I was trained the same way. I know exactly what the teachers taught her because that's what they taught me. She is a classic American liberal who has grown up in a world of right-wing pressures on liberals to become less liberal. And she wasn't all that liberal to begin with, so she's become less. She's married to another economics professor with a PhD, just like herself and me. I know who these people are. They are so far removed from a grasp of what this economy has meant to people that it's unfair to them to imagine that they would do anything other than a Band-Aid for a gunshot wound. That's who they are. They didn't see any of this. They were writing articles and books, which, by the way, I had to read, about the efficiency of a globalization. And the idea that there were masses of people whose lives were shaken to the core by all that has happened in the last 30, 40 years. I mean, I've had, not with them in particular, but I've had arguments with that kind of person because many of them are my personal friends. I went to school with them. I grew up with them. I know this sounds harsh, but they're nice people, by the way. These are not bad people. It's not bad. But they don't really get what's going on. They live in a textbook of economic manipulation. The Federal Reserve will pump money in and lower interest rates, and the Treasury will run a deficit, and that's how you did. Mr. Trump did the most extreme version under Trump and Mnuchin and the others and Powell. They pumped more money in than you could shake a stick at. They dropped interest rates to virtually zero, which hadn't been done before. They ran trillions of dollars of budgetary deficit when there was no war. I mean, everything that those liberals say you should do, kind of, they did. Not exactly the way the liberals would. They had their politics. They didn't give money to cities and states, which are why they're in such trouble now. But, adjusting for a few of these details, what are they going to do that's all that different? They're going to have budgetary deficits. They'll give it to the cities and states in a way that the Trump did. But again, if you don't transform things, you're not going to get out of this disaster. I find it ironic that they will say things like, you really have to do something about the COVID because this was an inadequate, or to use your metaphor, the way the United States dealt with COVID was a Band-Aid on a gunshot wound. They see it there. But when it comes to economics, no. They don't see it. They never did. And there's no reason to expect suddenly that there will be a shift. Now, I know, one last point. I know a few people, particularly progressives, are trying to remind us these days that Franklin Roosevelt, when he was first elected in 1932, in the depths of our depression, was a conservative, balanced budget type of democratic centrist, the rough equivalent of an Obama or a Clinton or something. That's true. And then he passed the New Deal and passed the first minimum wage and hired 15 million. Yeah. He changed. So the argument goes, see, Mr. Biden can change. No. There's a terrible flaw in that argument. Mr. Roosevelt didn't change because he had some personal epiphany. He changed because from below in American society, you had the greatest unionization drive in history. The CIO, millions of people terrified by the Depression joined the union. These were people who had never been in a union before. These were people whose parents and grandparents hardly knew what a union was. They joined, they were militant. They were led in most unions by communists, members of the American Communist Party, and members of the two socialist parties at the time, who worked closely together with the CIO. And they represented, in an organized way, millions of people. And they went to Roosevelt and they said, you better do something for the suffering that's going on, or we're not going to vote for you. And you're not going to be president very long. You know, I'm not taking away from Roosevelt. He might have missed the message. He might not have gotten the memo. He might have been lost on the links playing golf. Who knows? But he was smart enough to recognize the reality. Mr. Biden faces none of that. The unions are a shadow, a pale shadow of what they once were. The Communist Party and the Socialist parties, even with the rising DSA, are small, weak shadows of what they were then. Yes, there's Black Lives Matter, and yes, there's movement, but there's nothing like the organized, militant, coordinated, economics-focused powerhouse that existed then. And absent that, I don't see why I should believe that Joseph Biden, under any circumstances, will be more than a caretaker between one Trump and another.
And what I also think, you briefly touched on it earlier with the evictions, but both the eviction crisis, we could have moratoriums till we're blue in the face, but that's not canceling the rent. So all of this is going to be due, and I don't know. I know that the Democratic Party and Republicans, some of their biggest donors happen to be real estate developers, landlords. We saw Obama as president let the foreclosure crisis go on. I don't know, call me cynical. He did get a lot of Wall Street money and you know, that real estate money. So essentially, it just seems like Biden and the Democrats right now and governors are just kicking the can down the road. Eventually, I mean, landlords are going to kick these people out. Then you have the student loan crisis. Biden's talking about forgiving $10,000, which, I don't know, for most people with student loan debt, that might be good for 6 months of their debt. I mean, it just seems like a lot of this is kind of kicking cans down the road. And like you said, having no comprehension of the sheer magnitude of the economic despair.
Well, I agree with you. I understand the appeal of kicking the can down the road. We've been doing that a long time. Look, for example, at the racial problem, the problem of African American relationship to the larger white community. That's a can that has been kicked down the road over and over, whether it's, you know, the riots of the 1960s and as they spread across American cities, or the catastrophes earlier or later. But you know, you keep kicking it and it works, and you kick it again and it works, and you kick it again and then it doesn't, because it's just one too many. Black Lives Matter is a movement that is staying. It isn't going away. It's already been stronger than anyone foresaw. It has drawn in more white people as sympathizers than was expected. The normalcy of what happened to George Floyd or Michael Brown or any of the others is unacceptable. And, you know, you've kicked down the road. I remember Governor Cuomo in New York closing hospitals for the last several years, and his predecessors too. Bean counters extraordinary, explaining how profit loss calculations were the right way to go to make the hospitals efficient. Yeah, and now you have a pandemic of the sort we know is always in the air because it always has been. What kind of crazy mentality destroys the capacity to cope with diseases? And that neoliberal mentality, which is what overwhelmed the Clintons and the Obamas and the Yellens and all of them, it's such a testimony to misunderstood priorities that I frankly am frightened that the level of imagining that you can forever kick the can down the road, you can't. Look at us now. We're trying to battle one of the worst viral pandemics in modern history, one of the worst economic crashes of capitalism in modern history, and a racial divide in this country that is very deep and very how many more, and the climate crisis. I mean, any one of these is a real test for modern society, but the collection that you risk having happen at the same time by this can-kicking mentality, I mean, wow. I begin to wonder, have we arrived at that moment when we're overwhelmed by all those cans kicked over all those years that are now making it impossible for us to move?
And simply put, do you think that we could face something worse than a recession? Do you think that this could go towards an economic depression?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I don't believe there's any basis to think otherwise. Are there tools that the government has to try to prevent that? Yes. Is it possible that those tools will once again get us out of this pickle? The answer, unambiguously, yes. Are there any guarantees that these tools they have will work? Absolutely not. There never were. I mean, let me give you a historical example which will help. Capitalism is an economic system, been around now for three and a half centuries, where it started in England, spread to Europe, became global. It's our system now, everywhere. In that time, wherever capitalism settled in as the new economic system, pushing slavery out of the picture, pushing feudalism out of the picture, it had an economic downturn, a bust, a recession, a depression, a crash. We have a lot of words for it. Every 4 to 7 years. That's why I mentioned we have 20 years of this new century. We've had 3 crises right on schedule, 4 to 7 years, okay? That's a terrible problem for an economic system. That kind of instability, you didn't have that in slavery. You didn't have that in feudalism. You had a lot of other things, but you didn't have that kind of instability. And it has always scared the pants off of capitalists. Every 4 to 7 years, which is many times in a person's lifetime, the system falls apart. Millions of people are thrown out of work. Thousands of businesses go belly up. Cities, towns, and governments have no revenue to perform the public services that the people count on. I mean, this is a disaster. So the system has tried. Lord knows. I'm a professor of economics. That's what I study. That's what I teach. All the ways that capitalism has tried to get this instability under control, to overcome it, to end it, to stop it. In the depths of the Great Depression, we even had a very smart economist, John Maynard Keynes, in England, come up with a whole new kind of economics, whose fundamental purpose, as he said, was to try to get this instability under control. Here's the record of all those efforts by very smart people. 100% failed. We're in one now because they can't cope. You know, to say we weren't prepared for a virus, okay, there's not really an excuse. You know, we did have that horrible one in the Spanish flu in 1918. We've had MERS and SARS and Ebola. I mean, we really have no excuse. But they are at least irregular, but not economic crashes. They're on the money. Every 4 to 7 years, bam, you get it. We were not prepared. We were no better prepared for the economic crash than we were for the virus. There's no excuse. What kind of a system is unstable to begin with, like that, tries for 300 years to get a handle on it, fails, and then has to look around like a crazy person here in the year 2020 and admit it wasn't prepared for this, the latest in a 350-year history. For me, that's a very powerful history with a lesson that says this system can as likely spin out of control as it can come up with some magical fix, some policy, some mixture of a policy with kicking some more cans down the road that'll get us no symptoms now, or if you have a flu and you get over it. I mean, we're talking about a whole new level of burden on the Medicare and Medicaid systems. I mean, the ability of people to imagine that you can keep digging your hole deeper than this, no. You keep doing this at the same time that you make the rich richer, you're going to make an awful lot of people very angry. And look, I follow things around the world because I have to and I want to. But you're seeing more and more bitter, angry working classes. They voted Mr. Trump in. To give you 2 or 3 other examples, they were so bitter for the same reasons in England that they decided not to scapegoat the immigrants from Latin America. That was Mr. Trump's achievement. But to scapegoat what? Europe. We English people are going to Brexit. We're going to break from Europe. Yeah, good luck to you on that. That's going to solve exactly nothing of your problems, but make a good number of them worse. But people don't want to hear any more than telling them that, you know, separating children at the border from their mothers, a few thousand of them, isn't going to solve your problems of American economic. I mean, it's cruel, it's disgusting, but it doesn't solve anything, and people will sooner or later figure that out. In France, they're voting for an outright fascist. In Hungary, they already have the fascists. In Italy, they're flirting with the fascists. I mean, what? How long is this going to continue as people don't want to see the connection between what has become a dysfunctional economic system and the accumulation of crises it's putting people through?
Well, thanks for diagnosing it, Professor Wolff, and we will keep in touch as things develop. Richard Wolff, check him out on YouTube, Democracy at Work. Thanks again.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Okay.
Hope you enjoyed that last video. Hop on over to statuscoup.com where you can sign up for our email list and become a member for as low as $5 to $10 a month. Membership is how we grow. That's statuscoup.com/join. And remember, join our email list so we can grow the revolution with you. That was Professor Richard Wolff. His YouTube channel is Democracy at Work. He did say, because I had to wrap it, he had to go. He did say, next time we'll talk solutions, since obviously that was a little bit dire, shall we say.
But awesome to have Professor Wolff. Awesome to have Shama Sawant. I will post both of those tomorrow. I want to give a huge shout out. Holy cow, Mary in the GoFundMe. $350. I can't thank you enough, Mary. That is so generous. It's so needed, frankly. I don't want to get into the whole thing again, but we have, because of a website hack, our website was hacked, and we've lost a shit ton of members, excuse my French, since April. Once Jen is feeling better, we're going to have to, all of us, me and Jen, are going to have to actually individually email hundreds of members that were most likely made inactive. Not that they didn't cancel, but because of the hack of our website, their payments didn't go through. There was a glitch in our back end that hemorrhaged us hundreds of members, which cost us thousands of dollars in revenue a month. And that revenue is very important, because that's the revenue we use to go out in the field, travel around the country, and cover stories no one else is. As I explained last week, nobody's financial information was jeopardized at all. That's safe. We don't have that on our website. That's through PayPal and Stripe. But thank you so much for the GoFundMe donation. We've now raised an amazing $132,000 in 2.5 years. Our ultimate goal is $200,000, so got a ways to go. But we just keep chipping it away. Thanks to people like Mary. Kevin also left $50. Thank you so much, Kevin. That's really generous. Terrence, $20. Thank you. Just as an update, if you came late, Jen is still waiting on the results of her coronavirus test, but I think it's safe to say she probably has it. She's got 101.6 is her fever. Here's a little fever pic, her in bed. She says it's very difficult right now, even walking to the bathroom. She's that fatigued, with some minor shortness of breath. Nothing insane, nothing crazy shortness of breath, but minor shortness of breath with bad fatigue, and she is waiting. She took a home test yesterday for coronavirus, hasn't gotten the results yet. And tomorrow she plans on going to get an in-person test. But she does have all the symptoms: fatigue, chills, fever. And her fever is not low. I mean, 101.6 is nothing to joke about. It's definitely high. So definitely email your thoughts, info@statuscoup.com. I'm sure she would appreciate the well wishes. And I will update you as we have more information. So for now, she's just quarantining in her bedroom and, drinking a lot of fluids and resting up. So thank you. Tomorrow, one of my favorite days of the year, the top political turkeys of 2020. Oh my God, where do you even start? I don't want to give it away, but there's some real gems for the nominee for top turkey. So, maybe you have ideas. You could also email me. Get on the Discord, Status Coup. Get on our Discord. Who's your top turkey? By the way, the definition of political turkey is the biggest doofus, male or female, the biggest hypocrite, the biggest, the most corrupt, the biggest loser. That's kind of mishmash all that into a big bowl, and that's my definition of turkeys. So we are going to have them I'm hearing a lot of Elizabeth Warren as a nominee. A lot of Elizabeth Warren. Great minds think alike, folks. And please, if you haven't yet subscribed to this channel, what the hell are you doing? We are 300 subscribers away. 300 subscribers away from 100,000. So please subscribe if you have not. We'd love to hit 100,000 like now, if possible. So please subscribe and spread the coup. Tell your friends to subscribe.